Hello, I'm Kai Rosga, and welcome to Version Up, one lawyer's journey to digitally transform his legal practice. Hello, and welcome to Version Up. I hope you enjoy this episode and learn a few things, but please don't take anything I say too seriously. This is not my day job, and all views expressed here are my own. Today, I have on the episode Devon Willitts, Legal Engineering Lead at Robin AI. Devon and I talk about the latest generation of AI-powered legal tech solutions for large corporates. What problems can these solutions solve? How to track whether a solution's working? What sorts of information these tools need to be effective? Along the way, we also explore how AI and machine learning have evolved in the legal tech space and what it means for developing solutions for legal practitioners and how to get lawyers to use them. Hope you enjoy. Devon, welcome to Version Up.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you on. Why don't we kick off by just learning a little bit about your background and how you ended up in legal tech and how you picked up some technical skills around the way.
Definitely. So I currently work at a legal tech company called Robin. We are building a legal intelligence platform, and our mission is to make the law simple. So at Robin, I'm a legal engineering lead. How I got here, after graduating law school, I was an attorney at Davis Polk and Wardwell for a few years. I practiced capital markets and M&A law, and it seemed like every day there was a process or a task, especially as a junior, that I felt was just extremely rote, extremely repetitive. So I thought, I knew I wanted to get into technology, and legal tech seemed like obviously a great option, having the legal background. So I joined a small legal tech startup called LegalTech as the 10th employee. And this was way back. This was in 2020. So this was pre-ChatGPT. I spent 3 years there. And while I was there, because it was so early stage, I took on a bunch of different roles. So it ended up being kind of a quasi-legal, quasi-product role. And the main focus at LegalTech was contract redlining, which for many different legal tech companies, it has been a focus, I think, for various reasons. Many legal tech companies have focused on other things recently, and happy to get into why that is. But because this was pre-ChatGPT, we're using more traditional technologies like natural language processing to make specific changes in contracts according to a playbook. So I was there for 3 years. As I was leaving, we had begun testing the new OpenAI model. So that was the very first ChatGPT 3. And then I left and joined Robin, where I've been for over a year now. And at Robin, the work has been more research focused. Legal engineering at Robin sits within the research team. So I work very closely with our team of AI researchers and machine learning engineers. And at Robin, the technology is, I would say, exclusively large language model transformer focused, but that is definitely the backbone of many of our products. So we do have a pretty significant, large, sophisticated research team that allows us to stay up to date, make sure we're using the most recent technologies to power all of our tools. But I think it's been fun learning a new domain, especially when it's mission oriented. And I don't necessarily like the binary distinction between whether someone is technical or not, because I don't think there really is like a bright line distinction. So clearly someone who has gone to school for computer science will have a head start and know basic coding languages. They'll have a broader base to start from. But as someone with zero coding experience, there's just so many tools and documentation and YouTube videos out there that the barrier to picking it up is really just time and effort.
Yeah, I know as a user, as someone out there trying to learn about products, I find it really helpful to find people who know the technology and know how to explain how it works. That's always really great to be able to kind of press a little bit on those details. Even if I'm not a technical person, I still, as a lawyer, want to get over a certain threshold of comfort that the technology is not just some magic in the background, that I can trust it and it's reliable. But I think it's interesting to hear you're kind of kicking this all off as a junior attorney in big law, because I think about the kind of people who move into legal tech space who were practicing, and it's people who are more senior. But in some ways, maybe it makes even more sense for someone junior because, from my experience working as a junior lawyer at a law firm, I was probably closest to those repetitive, lower value, let's call them tasks, which I don't know if you agree with this, but it seems like technology space is tackling those first. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but it does seem like an interesting moment to switch.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that's kind of what I realized when I was there and realized that a lot of what I was doing, I think technology could do. I have a lot of friends that have moved into legal tech as well. Some of them were at law firms for much longer than I was, and I think that's obviously valuable. You become more of a domain expert. My experience though has been, I think the fastest you learn is as a junior. You're learning like much more quickly. So especially within the domains that I practiced in, I have a generally good sense of what, at a high level, what the main use cases are, what lawyers do at every level of seniority. So that's been helpful, especially because, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but some of our primary use cases, at least one of them, is really focused on M&A due diligence, which is our tables feature. And so that's something that obviously I'm super familiar with. But another thing I've realized is practicing law isn't monolithic. There's so many different types of lawyers, so many different industries, so many different types of workflows and use cases that one of the hardest problems we have is finding the right ones to focus on. And I'd say the downside of relying on one particular lawyer to describe what the use case is that you focus on the ones that you know and you forget about the 999 other ones that there are out there. So we do have lawyers from a lot of different backgrounds, but that is one of the hardest problems is just finding the right use cases.
Yeah, and I will say that as someone going on this journey, starting from zero almost in terms of expertise or knowledge about how technology was used in the legal practice, that I started with big picture, high level kind of ideas of what this technology and what AI in particular can do for my practice. And as I get closer to deploying things in my practice, they actually tend to be much more narrow in scope and they tend to tackle more specific problems. So I think as a user, if you go through it thoughtfully, you end up in the same journey and the same outcome that it seems like a lot of developers end up going on.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's tough because the field's moving so quickly. So I know the goal of the top model providers and the top labs is to make models that are more general purpose, but that's very difficult to do. So as they push that boundary, it's happening slowly, but it does open up the more narrow use cases. And I think you build enough narrow use cases and that eventually broadens what the technology can do. And that's what we're trying to do with our legal intelligence platform. And I think that's like one way to think about or categorize lots of these legal tech companies is whether they're going broad or whether they're going deep. Some are trying to do both. And that's a tricky question to answer. I don't know if anyone's really figured it out yet, but that is definitely one of the key questions.
Well, that was where I wanted to go next, which was to ask you when you talk about a legal solutions platform, how does Robin, how do you think about it? What makes it a platform as opposed to being, kind of a tailored solution?
Yeah. So I think we did start off with some tailored solutions, and I think a lot of legal tech companies start there. Our mission is to make the law simple. And because, like I said, there's just so many different things that lawyers do, I think you really give up if you're only focusing on one or two of them.
Mhm.
So we want to ultimately solve all of the tedious problems that lawyers face, from contract review to legal research to collaborating with internal and external teams. So the platform that we're building, we call it a legal intelligence platform, and it gives lawyers the tools to upload contracts, organize contracts, automatically parse contracts, which allows us to add important metadata for querying and answering questions over later, to extract more complex legal information from contracts, translate contracts into different languages, conduct legal research on internal and external knowledge bases. So we want to be able to do a lot. And the way we think about positioning is you have a lot of these legacy legal tech platforms that I think you would call systems of record, like Ironclad, which their purpose is to be like a repository for contracts, but not too much beyond that. And they're trying to add AI functionality with mixed success. And then you have more tailored or purely like legal intelligence solutions where it's about extracting data from your contracts, which is like Harvey and Legora, and to a certain extent us. And we're really trying to sit in the middle and bridge both of those things. So we want to be both the system of record and provide the intelligence so that you can actually use the contracts that you have stored on the platform.
Interesting. So a system of records, would that be closer to what some people call a CLM or a contract lifecycle management system, or is it something else?
I think a CLM, one of their primary goals was to be the system of record for their users. I think it's kind of hard to like have just the intelligence piece if the contracts are also not living on your platform. So we don't want to be a CLM, and we're not trying to replicate that model. We're focused on the intelligence part, but it's kind of goes hand in hand with becoming the system of record. So we recognize that we need to have a threshold level of functionality for users to be comfortable using us as a system of record.
So let's talk about the functionality. If we put aside some of the technical sort of terms, what are the main problems Robin is trying to solve and how is it doing it?
I'd say the main problems we're trying to solve now are legal research, contract review, and revision. And I'm sitting within contract review is data extraction from contracts. So that's kind of at a high level what we're trying to solve. And obviously those are very broad categories and different lawyers and different use cases. The unique workflows look different, but at a high level, that's what we're going for.
Okay, yeah. So if we take contract review, revision, data extraction, would it be appropriate to use the M&A due diligence context to kind of work through some examples of how a user might engage with those features? Or what would be a good example for us to walk through and understand how the features work?
Yeah, so M&A diligence is a great one, especially because it's the one I'm most familiar with because that's my background. So at Robin, we have a feature that we call tables. And basically what it allows you to do is upload a large volume of contracts and structure a set of questions to ask over those contracts. And the model on the platform converts every document into a row, every question into a column, and then the answer to every question over every document into a cell. And it does it in a matter of minutes. And the limit on contracts is hundreds, perhaps thousands, and that limit is increasing all the time. So it basically takes a process that would have taken weeks and makes it take a few minutes. And obviously there's work that goes into being able to verify the answers. And so we have the ability to verify answers and provide citations. And those are all really interesting features I'm happy to get into as well. But that's the core functionality, at least for the M&A diligence problem.
For your clients, what is the work on the front end? So for example, let's stay with the M&A diligence example. How does Robin know which questions to ask or which questions are of interest to the client?
Robin will provide templates based on our expertise and domain understanding, but to a large extent, that's left up to the client as well. And so each person on the client team has the ability to ask their own sets of questions and make templates and share that within their own teams. But yeah, because that piece is relatively bespoke, we have our starting place templates, but we leave that up to users. And then the diligence piece is important, but just you can see how having the ability to extract a lot of information from a large volume of contracts can be useful in other cases. So the other example that I love to talk about, I think this came up in the bootcamp where we met, but is the cyber breach, where we had a client that suffered a cyber breach. They have thousands of contracts where they want to understand what their notification requirements are. And they were able to upload thousands of contracts and get an answer to that question, again, in like a matter of minutes. And then obviously it takes a bit longer to go through and verify and do the work of doing the notification. But that upfront piece would have taken an army of lawyers many hours to do
Yeah.
without these legal tools.
Yeah. So let me see if I can try to think about it in my kind of simple way. I'm going to have a bunch of questions as a lawyer that need answering. And those questions are about some body of contracts, right? It might be diligence, it might be some other context, but I have a bunch of contracts and I have some questions I need answered about those contracts. Before, I might throw someone at that task, might spend 2 days word searching, keyword searching the documents, maybe they can't. Maybe they have to review them one by one. They're going to create a table, maybe in Microsoft Word, right? It's going to summarize the answers to the questions. And then maybe that person will hand that table back to me, and then I run with it, right? Then I have the information I need. Sounds like I'm still going to need to have those questions, of course, figured out on my own. Robin's going to get plugged in at that point to help me cut down on the time spent by that middle step, which is the actual pulling out the information so that we have the answers. And then what happens on the back end? Is Robin either in the pipeline, or do you currently have features that go to that intelligence part where there's insights or strategic thinking being provided? Or is it still at a stage where that information comes back to me, I get the table, and then I run with it, I use my expertise to analyze it?
So it depends on the question being asked. There's definitely flexibility and the ability to do more complex reasoning above and beyond just simple data extraction. One of the features that is embedded within this tables product is something we call answer types. And it's good for a lot of different reasons. It's good because it gives you the ability to restrict the model output. So the most common model output would just be straight text, which is useful in a lot of different cases. But with answer types, we also allow users to restrict the model output to number, or currency, or date, or dollar value, or a unique list of choose one of three of these options and none else. And so there are ways to replicate that with just careful prompting. You could ask a model and prompt a model to return specific outlets, but there's always a risk that the model's not going to follow the instruction. So the way we do it is more programmatic and deterministic, where the model can only output those types of output. So in terms of like more complex reasoning on top of the questions, being able to have a defined list of values that the model can choose from can get you to that next step of the thing I'm thinking about is like red, yellow, green. Are these provisions compliant with my existing stated or ideal position? And so you have the ability to include your ideal position within the prompt and then ask the model how closely it aligns with that position. That's obviously starting to get more complex, and the models have varying level of accuracy with that more complex type of reasoning. That would start to stray into the area of where I want to have an expert human review it as well, and then wait until you get more comfortable with it before you're relying on it entirely. But we have a lot of ways to make sure you can verify that the output is accurate and is what you want.
No, it's interesting. It's almost like you take that middle person I was describing, this sort of junior, let's say, level person, and you slowly are chipping away at the role that they would be playing in that whole workflow. You talk about the yellow, green, red light kind of approach. I'm already thinking, yeah, that's actually something that junior person would be doing on the first cut. They'd be highlighting the rows, and then I would quickly, based on my experience with that person and how much I trust their judgment, I would know, okay, the reds, I need to go straight to those. The yellows, I probably have to double check. The greens, I can just skim. But in the end, and this is probably, to me, a common theme, exploring legal tech at this stage is these are tools that are leaving a lot of room for the strategic thinking and the sort of core high value add tasks to still be performed by a lawyer, by a person, right? Whether it's, again, the input, which is what questions we need to ask, because that requires a lot of experience and strategic thought to know which questions to ask. You're not wasting time on questions you don't need answered. You're asking the right questions. Someone like me might be doing that. And then on the back end, what actionable steps you take based on information, that's going to still be something that I'm involved in. But the features you're describing, at least from how I hear them, are really in that middle phase of that process.
Obviously, prompting is very important. What we're coming to realize as a company, I think like industry wide as well, is that almost as important as the prompt, if not more important, is the context that you give the model when you're asking questions. So if you just ask a model to compare a position or a provision to market standard without giving it much information, that response probably won't be that helpful, because market standard, that's hard to define, and different people think about that in different ways. So what you would really want to do is provide like a detailed description of what you think market standard is or what your ideal position is, and then the model has something to go off of. I think where the lawyer expertise still comes in is knowing what's the right context to provide.
Yeah. And I don't mean to skip too far ahead, but one of the main learnings I'm experiencing as I get further into my journey here, understanding legal tech solutions, is no matter how cool the features are and how great the technology is, often too late in the process, I'm realizing I have to go all the way back to the start because we don't have the foundation that goes into the cool technology, meaning whether it's information, whether it's data, whether it's workflows that are already in place, whether it's playbooks, templates. If you don't have those, then the technology doesn't have much to work with. And you are creating those from scratch, right? At a time when you're trying to get a solution that's going to help you be more efficient. I got to stop what I'm doing. I got to create a playbook that's not already there. And then I can put in place the technology. For some people, that's a proposition that's worth taking or investment worth making. For others, if they don't have a capacity or the time to do it, they're like, I can't deal with this right now. And then full stop, right? You don't deploy the technology. So when you talk to clients or users, what do you tell them? Hey, here are the fundamental building blocks you want to have in place so that our product is maximizing its output for you and really adding the value that you expect to add. What's the foundation that, in a best case scenario, what should a client have in place? And then what's kind of the medium case you see?
Our target customers are in-house legal teams at large enterprises, which does set us apart a little from some of our competitors who focus more on law firms. So our ideal customer is in-house legal team at large enterprise. And then we also focus on private markets, so private equity firms, and then smaller law firms. So there is a broad range of where our prospects are starting from in terms of the data and knowledge bases that they're starting from. But more often than not, they're sophisticated, large enterprises that their problem is not necessarily that they don't have the data or the information, is that they don't have a way of organizing it and accessing it. So that is, I think, a bigger problem in my mind is that you have a ton of information. You have years and years of excellent legal content that you've built up, but you're not leveraging it, right? And so that's probably problem number one. And then when we're talking about maybe another one of our ideal customer profiles, like smaller law firms, then that would, I think, relate more closely to what you're talking about, which is just providing like a scaffolding and basic templates and knowledge base that the small law firm can leverage. So a piece of that is data, having Robin as a repository where you can store that data, like you said, contract playbooks. Some of our users come to us with contract playbooks. Funnily enough, many of the large enterprises who you would think would have very built out playbooks are actually the ones that don't, because it's very hard, because they have such large teams and so much to think about, that for them to put together a playbook is like a years long process. And so often we're not starting with playbooks for large enterprises, but then you'll also have like clause or template libraries and standards that we leverage and that we have plugins for, so you can drop that into our platform and start working on immediately. But yeah, that's kind of how I think about the problem of what do you need? What's the threshold you need to be able to start to get value from the Robin product?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you have learned this along the way that every organization is so unique and different, and there's so many differences in how legal departments are structured and how budgets operate and how decision-making goes. And that can lead to some surprising results. Large, sophisticated companies can have a lot less of that foundation or scaffolding than sometimes you expect. And I wonder also that leads to some sort of sampling bias where the people coming to you or other solutions like yours are a little better positioned than the average. But I would suspect there's a lot of people out there in the market who don't have that scaffolding, but are thinking about it and are building it and are doing it, I think, in part because they are seeing that there's a huge value once you have that to be able to then leverage technology on top of it.
There's definitely a transition going on, I think, within the legal industry where it's not just an improvement on what exists, it's opening up new capabilities. And so I think that's bringing a lot more legal teams to the table.
Yeah, and it frankly can be a challenge on my end of things. So I'm an in-house lawyer at a large corporate, part of a specialized team. The challenge can be that sometimes it's easy to sell a snazzy sounding product that sounds really cool. It's a lot harder to sell. We have to go spend 6 months doing a bunch of work to create playbooks or clause libraries. It just doesn't sound as fun. That's something that we on the client side have to work on and figure out. I don't know that the vendors have really much to do there. They're doing their part by creating this technology and promising us these interesting features. I think some of the work on the client side is figuring out internally, how do you get people excited or at least motivated enough to invest the time and resources it can take to build that scaffolding up?
Yeah, I think because of that, one of the things we're seeing is the common way to sell now is via proof of concept. So I think there's on the vendor side, that obviously extends the sales cycle, but that's just becoming kind of the way things are done within legal tech. So, which, and I think is good because it's new technology, like people are unsure about it. And fairly, I think a lot of people feel like they've been burned by legal tech of the past. The proof of concept model is basically taking over. And so we released our latest, this legal intelligence platform just a few weeks ago and have signed up maybe like 90 proof of concepts in the first few weeks. And so we have a pretty built out customer success team that run those proof of concepts. It takes a lot of work with users to get them, in some cases, set up on the platform and comfortable using the different tools that Robin has.
I'm curious, let's take a proof of concept example. How are you measuring the success of your solution? How, at the end of the 60, 90 days or however long a pilot is running, what would a client take to their senior leadership to show this product is working, it's doing what we expected it to do, and we should pay money to subscribe to it on a broader basis more permanently? What kind of quantitative metrics do you look to help them make that case?
Mm-hmm. Our North Star metric, which is helpful for us, but I think users can use it as well. And this has changed over time, but it's just number of documents uploaded is kind of like just a raw, easy to track number that gives us an idea of how much people are using the platform and how useful it is. So a big part of the proof of concepts and just our offering in general is we want to do everything we can to make it as easy as possible to upload documents to our platform and to be able to generate insights from those documents from day one. Beyond that, we do have some specific piloting and onboarding metrics. So onboarding completion, percent of participants that are completing and have completed the onboarding sessions that we provide. We have adoption benchmarks. So percent of users that are engaging with Robin, prompting Robin, using the tools at least a set number of times per week. And then the numbers are obviously helpful because they're easy to track and they can provide a quick snapshot. But really, qualitative feedback is most important. It's harder to track and harder to collect, but we do structured surveys and interviews to find out why people are using the platform, or conversely, to find out why they're not using it. And that's, I think, definitely, in my opinion, where we uncover most of the insights and where we can troubleshoot if something's not working for someone and narrow in and focus in on why that is. And then we will obviously want to be broadly helpful across the board to as many users as possible, but we're obviously happy when there's champions or power users, which seems to happen with every implementation. And so when there's a Robin champion or power user, we want to really dig into how they're using the platform, where they're deriving value, see if we can replicate the work that they're doing, the workflows that they've created, the templates that they've created, and share them across their team to help other users get the same amount of value as these power users.
And that qualitative analysis, that comes through interviews with users or sending surveys, that kind of thing?
Surveys, interviews. Our customer success team meets very frequently and is very involved with proof of concepts and new users from the beginning. So we get like weekly feedback, structured and unstructured, from all of our users. That's it's not unique to Robin, but that also massively informs our product roadmap and the direction that we want to take the platform in. So we're always keen to get feedback.
And your users on their end, I imagine, have their own ways of tracking the effectiveness of this or other technology they're deploying. I could imagine easily that the clients have a legal operations person, or they have some other person who's in the operations, maybe on the technical side, who's keeping track of how much time did it take to review 20 contracts for this particular purpose before, how quickly did it happen using Robin's solution, and being able to compare those and say, look, we saved X percent of time by using this tool. Imagine that's a big part of proving up the business case internally with the client. I have to assume that's going on their side. Let me come back to something you said early on. We can get a little nerdy for a second here. You talked about a transition from developing legal technology in the pre-GPT days, and then the transition to where we are now and having these large language models be a foundation for the legal tech solutions we're seeing in the market. Can you just tell me a little more about what exactly is the AI or machine learning that's powering products such as Robin? And what has, if anything, what has changed as a result of the rollout of these foundational models and a huge interest in generative AI?
That's a big question. I think the generative models are more flexible, they're more powerful. They let you do things in a much shorter amount of time that previously would have taken relatively complex, sophisticated machine learning approaches. So one good example is sentiment analysis. Before Transformers and ChatGPT, to be able to do sentiment analysis on customer reviews or whatever you want, you would, my understanding is, have to collect a lot of data, train machine learning models, go through a lot of steps. Now you can literally copy and paste a paragraph into ChatGPT and say, is this a positive or negative sentiment? Multiply that by 100,000 times. The tools are there ready for you to use. So I think it's just quicker to get to where you're trying to go with the general purpose. I think another super important question is, how is what we're doing different or better than general purpose large language models? So I think that's probably the key question every company building on top of large language models needs to answer for medium and long-term success. And it's getting even harder to answer because the top research labs like OpenAI and Anthropic, not only are they building extremely powerful models, but more and more they're also becoming very successful product companies. So it's something to contend with. I think there are a few dimensions I think about to categorize the difference between Robin and some of our competitors in general purpose models. So I think probably most importantly, and perhaps most obvious, which is just that we are exclusively focused on legal use cases, whereas general purpose LLMs are just that, they're general purpose. General purpose tools just don't have the same functionality, focus, and prioritization that would make them as useful for lawyers as legal specific tools. So they might be able to draft emails or summarize documents, but they lack legal domain understanding and can miss context or use non-legal language. So comparing Robin to a general purpose LLM like O3, like OpenAI's O3, or even a general purpose quote unquote wrapper like Copilot. If you look at legal research, for example, when Robin conducts legal research, because of the engineering and the way that we've built our backend, we're exclusively focusing on trusted and authoritative legal resources. And we spend a lot of engineering effort to ensure that only trusted sources are referenced whenever a web search or legal research query is asked. Copilot, on the other hand, and even other top AI labs do not have that focus. And if you run a web search query on any of those more general purpose tools, even if you try to limit the search to legal subject matter with a carefully drafted prompt,
Yep.
you'll find that frequently sources being referenced are not legally authoritative. So I think that's one big difference.
Pause there for a second, because one of the issues I have trying to use some of the out of the box chatbots, let's call it, is also the inverse problem, which is I'm begging it to look at specific things that are on the open web, and it seems to just refuse to do so. I mean, I'm sitting there, I'm telling it, here's a bunch of stuff online that I know has the answer to my question, and I cannot seem to cajole, beg, plead my way to get the model to really take it in. And you described also the other version, which is there's stuff that you don't want the model to be paying attention to. So, what is the sort of engineering that goes on to make those problems go away and have a tool that using legal domain expertise is able to be more accurate?
This kind of goes back to what I was saying about, I think the most important piece is knowing what context to provide and having the ability to provide that context. So for our legal research tool, for example, we broadly limit it to authoritative legal sources. And then we also provide the capability to target individual sources if you reference it in your question. And so that's a combined way to also limit your search, but also focus it on particular searches. There's also ways to block particular sources if you know you don't want to reference certain areas. And some of this stuff is more on our product roadmap, not necessarily right in our platform today, but also being able to limit your search to specific jurisdictions and specific areas of law are important things that we want to do. And I think that's like related to web search in particular, but there's also things that we do with respect to document ingestion and optical character recognition and document chunking that is more of a like a foundational layer, but improves results across all areas. For example, we have specific logic that when you were ingesting documents, understands different series of clauses and subclauses and what the nature of that or those different clause relationships means in a legal context. Whereas I would guess that O3 out of the box is doing stuff like that.
Yeah, I understand. I work for an employer who has one of the major productivity suites, and we have the ability to use their chatbot Gen AI tool. And so always the question, anytime you are proposing deploying technology to solve a solution as a lawyer at a company like that, one of the first questions will be, well, why can't you just use what we already have? Why can't you take the out of the box tool that we already subscribe to? And the short answer for me often is, well, because it just doesn't work. It doesn't do anything that I want it to do because what I do is quite specialized and it's quite specific. And maybe at some point, these general tools become, and the general purpose LLMs become so good that they are able to do that. But at the moment, very clear to me that they're not there yet. So that's why I continue to make the argument for looking for technology solutions that are more tailored for our domain.
Yeah. And I think that's the key question that not only all legal tech AI companies have to answer, but any company building on top of any of these models is you really need to understand what the models are capable of and where they're going and build on that frontier in such a way that you don't get eclipsed by the models, but just as the models get more powerful, you're a boat kind of rising with the tide. And so I think that's obviously what we strive to do, but it's difficult.
I just saw something in my news feed earlier today about a ChatGPT agent coming
Yes, or at least yesterday.
productized. Yeah, so it's every day. And in some ways, look, as someone who's interested in deploying technology, you, Devon, you're involved in developing technology, selling it. We all live in this hyped up climate, which can be great in some ways because it helps promote new things and it helps push people towards deploying technology, which can be a difficult thing from all sides of this. But it can also create some hurdles because the expectations can be unreasonably high. If I'm trying to explain to someone what a certain tool can or cannot do, they may have expectations that are way too high based on what they've read in the media about Gen AI. And so it's a challenge I think everyone in the industry has to deal with is how to navigate those expectations and not set ourselves up for failure or disappointment. Because practically speaking, sometimes one strike and you're out in the sense that if you misfire and deploy something that doesn't work, people are going to be more skeptical the next time you come back with another idea. So it's just one of those challenges that we all, I think, are confronting.
Definitely. And it's funny because I work a lot with engineers over the last few years. And one big difference between engineers and lawyers is when you're building something for engineers and get them to try it out, if it doesn't work, you can come back not too long later and say, well, we've made some upgrades, we've made some improvements, you want to try it out again? And engineers are typically excited to try it out because they like the thought of upgrades and improvements and coming along for the ride. For lawyers, for the most part, not always, but in some cases, you really only get one query. And if a lawyer asks a query, if they have a query that they like use to just suss out whether they are comfortable using a model and it doesn't work, comes back with the wrong answer, sometimes you lose them right there and they can be difficult to reactivate. So yeah, getting it right on the first time is difficult, but super important.
Yeah, as a lawyer or someone's practiced law for a long time, I try to be sympathetic and understanding of where those impulses come from, just based on the incentives and expectations and the role that lawyers play in an organization. But at the same time, I recognize those as shortcomings when it comes to trying to innovate and trying to achieve a digital transformation. And as a result, it's something that I keep in mind when I'm thinking about how am I going to try to sell this internally, for example. So to me, these kind of conversations on the podcast here, even getting a little more technical is really helpful because I'm translating with a lawyer's mind and thinking, how can I take this concept and how does this help me in making that sort of clear sales pitch internally? How am I going to be able to explain this to someone who doesn't have all the technical expertise, doesn't have any of the background knowledge, and again, has some of these, call them biases, or I don't know what to call them, but they have certain inclinations or they have certain shortcuts that can cause problems if you misfire and you deploy a technology too soon or for the wrong purpose.
Yeah. One helpful way to think about it is these technologies, like LLMs in particular, are incredibly powerful. In some ways, they're not like humans at all, but in some ways, they actually do resemble humans in a lot of ways. And one example of that is the quality of the input, the quality of the context that you give them is the most important factor determinant for the quality of the output that you get from them. So in the same way, you wouldn't give a one sentence or sub one sentence instruction to a junior attorney to complete a task. If you give that same instruction to a model, no matter how powerful it is and how many fancy integrations you have and whatever work we've done on the side, it's not going to give you a good output if you don't give it good instruction and good input.
That's such great advice. And in some ways, and as I think about it now, we're living in sort of the Google search world, a world that was built with people using Google search. And what I mean by that is we actually started with like Ask Jeeves. We started with these long questions and then Google search made it simpler and simpler and simpler to the point where we're just used to throwing a few words in a Google search and getting an answer. And so now when we engage with ChatGPT, Gemini, or whatnot, and we sort of take that same shortcut, that's actually to our detriment because the model needs more information. So I'm slowly unlearning those habits as I use those tools more in my day. And like you suggested, I'm finding myself providing more context, more detail in my queries. And I'll just tell you, like as a user making that transition, it's something you have to learn and adapt to. It's not intuitive, especially after spending 10 years firing off a Google search with sentence fragments that are 4-5 words, right? And then going back to something that's a little more long form.
All that said, interestingly, there are ways to use the technology to even account for that. So we do a lot of testing around something we call query rewriting. So when we do get a query that does not have the information that we need or is lacking in some other way, there's actually quite a few things that we can do to supplement the query to perhaps prompt the user to provide more information or automatically provide more information. So ultimately, maybe you will be able to just do the fragmented questions the same way you do in a Google search and get a good output. I don't think that's the case right now, but yeah, who knows? Who knows where it's going to go?
And that might be another benefit of having a tool that has domain specific application and expertise, right? Because you know your users better than OpenAI knows any random user. And so you can learn what are they trying to do, and you can learn from seeing their fragmented searches, and you can sort of in the background do some engineering to help get them there without them even knowing it. Whereas OpenAI can't do that because they can't possibly know what every single user is going to do with their tool, at least not based on current compute resources.
Yeah, and we learn from the top labs too, like the query rewriting. I think that's something that OpenAI does for the deep research tool. But like you said, it's general purpose. I think there's ways that we can make it legal specific that make it more useful for lawyers in particular.
Yeah, cool. Well, Devon, thank you so much for joining, for helping educate me a little more and helping me on my journey here, trying to figure out how to use technology to make my legal practice more efficient. Thank you for telling me more about Robin and its products and services, and look forward to seeing what else comes from the product roadmap.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks for having me on. And we're always doing new boot camps. And like I said, we just rolled out a new platform. So you should come to the next one because it's lots of new things to show off.
Thank you for the invite. It's great to see the tech startup world just expanding so much in New York in my backyard. It's a lot easier than going to the West Coast, even if I like the weather there. So it's always great to meet more vendors and legal tech minds in the New York area.
Yeah, no, it's very exciting.
Thanks, man.